A badge doesn't grant you the right to let prejudice dictate your actions. Officer Bradley Jenkins learned this the hard way, when he proudly slapped handcuffs on a black man washing a luxury car in an upscale neighborhood. He thought he was making a career-defining arrest. Instead, he just arrested his new precinct commander. The late July sun was beating down on the pristine, tree-lined streets of Oak Ridge Estates, casting long, elegant shadows across the manicured lawns. Oak Ridge was the kind of neighborhood where the houses sat far back from the road the sprinklers ran on synchronized timers, and the median income was high enough that people rarely locked their front doors. It was a quiet, affluent suburb of Westridge, a place where trouble was something you watched on the evening news, not something that happened in your driveway. Nicholas Foster loved the quiet. At 46 years old, quiet was exactly what he had spent the last 2 decades earning. Nicholas was a man who carried his years of hard work in the broadness of his shoulders and the observant, calm focus in his dark eyes. He was wearing faded Levi's, a white, sweat-stained cotton t-shirt and old sneakers. In his right hand, he held a soapy sponge. In his left, a garden hose. Before him, gleaming under the afternoon sun, was his pride and joy, a fully restored, cherry-red, 1969 Chevrolet Chevelle SS. He had spent 5 years bringing the classic muscle car back to life, pouring blood, sweat, and a small fortune into the engine block and the flawless paint job. He was treating the chrome bumper with meticulous care, the smell of premium car wax mixing with the scent of freshly cut grass from the neighbor's yard. Today was Saturday. On Monday morning, Nicholas would put on a freshly pressed uniform pin, a newly minted silver badge to his chest, and walk into the 42nd Precinct as its new watch commander and sergeant. After 22 grueling years working undercover narcotics and gang units in the city's toughest districts, this promotion and this beautiful home in Oak Ridge were his rewards. He had just moved into the 4-bedroom house 3 weeks ago, following a divorce that had amicably but heavily split his assets. This Saturday afternoon was supposed to be a rare moment of absolute peace. 2 blocks away, Westridge Police Cruiser Unit 4, Adam was rolling slowly past the sprawling properties. At the wheel was Officer Bradley Jenkins. Jenkins was 24 years old, 2 years out of the academy, and possessed a dangerous combination of soaring ambition and staggering arrogance. He had close-cropped blonde hair, a jawline he frequently clenched to look authoritative, and a deep-seated belief that his intuition was sharper than any training manual. He was desperate to make detective before he hit 30, and he spent every shift hunting for the kind of high-profile felony busts that looked good on a promotion board. Riding in the passenger seat was Officer Roland Callahan. At 51, Callahan was a tired, graying veteran who was exactly 14 months away from his pension. He had seen enough of the streets to know that 90% of the job was just talking to people like human beings. He had been paired with Jenkins for 3 months, and he spent most of his shifts trying to rein in the rookie's hyper-aggressive tendencies. "Take a left on Elmwood," Callahan murmured, taking a sip from his lukewarm convenience store coffee. "Let's just cruise the perimeter and head back toward the commercial district. Nothing happens up here except noise complaints about pool boys." "Criminals know we don't patrol up here," Jenkins replied, his eyes scanning the driveways like a hawk looking for field mice. "That's exactly why we should. Opportunists love neighborhoods like this. Rich people leave their garages open keys in the ignitions." Jenkins trailed off. His foot tapped the brake, slowing the cruiser to a crawl. Halfway down the block, sitting in the wide paved driveway of a sprawling colonial-style home, was the cherry-red Chevelle. And standing next to it, wiping down the hood, was Nicholas Foster. Jenkins's eyes narrowed. The gears in his head, entirely stripped of logic and entirely fueled by racial bias and assumption, began to turn. He looked at the multi-million-dollar house. He looked at the immaculate $100,000 classic car. Then he looked at the black man in a faded t-shirt washing it. "Look at that," Jenkins muttered, pointing a finger against the steering wheel. Callahan leaned forward, squinting through the glare of the windshield. "Look at what a guy washing his car. You think a guy dressed like a day laborer owns a $90,000 classic Chevelle?" Jenkins said, his voice dropping into a register of forced authority. "You think he owns that house?" Callahan sighed heavily, the kind of deep, weary exhale that came from years of dealing with rookies who watched too many action movies. "Jenkins, stop. It's a Saturday. The guy is washing a car in a driveway. There's no broken glass, no alarms, no panicked homeowners. Leave it alone." "I'm running the plates," Jenkins said, ignoring his partner. He typed the Chevelle's license plate into the cruiser's mobile data terminal. "Jenkins, I swear to God, do not go looking for trouble where there is none," Callahan warned, his tone hardening. The screen blinked. The car was registered to a Nicholas Foster with an address listed right there on Elmwood Drive. But Jenkins didn't bother to click into the full DMV profile to check the owner's photograph. He didn't check the occupation code. He only saw the name. "Vehicle is registered to the address," Jenkins noted, but his grip on the steering wheel only tightened. Could be a detailer. Could be a mechanic taking it for a joyride. Or maybe he broke into the house, found the keys, and is prepping it to drive off. Callahan stared at him in disbelief. "He's washing it with a sponge, Brad. Car thieves don't usually apply a coat of wax before a grand theft auto." "I'm initiating a field interview," Jenkins declared. Before Callahan could order him to keep driving, Jenkins cranked the steering wheel hard to the right. The 2-ton police interceptor surged forward, its tires squeaking against the asphalt as Jenkins pulled it aggressively into Nicholas's driveway. He parked at a harsh angle, effectively blocking the Chevelle and the end of the driveway so no vehicle could leave. Nicholas Foster didn't flinch. He heard the heavy engine of the Ford Explorer, heard the tires on his concrete, but he didn't immediately turn around. He calmly finished wiping down the driver's side mirror, turned off the garden hose nozzle, and then slowly turned to face the officers. Decades on the force had trained Nicholas's eyes to take in an entire scene in fractions of a second. He noted the cruiser's position, a blocking maneuver, tactically sound, but legally aggressive for a non-emergency stop. He noted the numbers on the bumper. 42nd Precinct, his new precinct. He looked at the 2 officers. The passenger, an older white cop, looked profoundly annoyed and embarrassed. The driver, a young squared-off cop, was already out of the vehicle, his hand resting instinctively on his duty belt, right next to his sidearm. Nicholas's pulse remained perfectly steady, but a cold, hard realization settled into his chest. He knew exactly what this was. He had spent his whole life navigating the treacherous waters of being a black man in America, and his entire career trying to weed out cops who policed with their prejudices instead of their brains. The rookie was puffing his chest out, marching up the driveway. The lesson was about to begin. "Drop the sponge and step away from the vehicle," Officer Jenkins commanded. His voice was loud, projecting across the quiet suburban lawns. Nicholas looked at the soapy sponge in his hand, then back to Jenkins. He didn't drop it. Instead, he calmly tossed it into the red plastic bucket sitting by his feet. He wiped his wet hands on his jeans, maintaining a relaxed, non-threatening posture. "Good afternoon, officer," Nicholas said, his voice deep, smooth, and utterly devoid of fear. "Can I help you with something?" Jenkins stopped about 6 feet away, invading the natural boundary of the property. "Whose car is this?" he demanded, his eyes darting from Nicholas to the interior of the Chevelle, looking for a popped ignition or broken steering column. "It's mine," Nicholas answered simply. Jenkins scoffed a short, ugly sound of disbelief. "Right. And I suppose you own the house, too. I do, Nicholas replied. Moved in a few weeks ago. Officer Callahan had stepped out of the passenger side, hanging back near the rear quarter panel of the cruiser. He was watching Nicholas intently. There was something about the man's stance. He wasn't shifting his weight. He wasn't nervously glancing around. He held his ground with the rooted, balanced posture of a man who had faced down actual gunfire, not just a belligerent rookie. Callahan felt a cold knot of dread form in his stomach. "Sir," Callahan called out, trying to introduce some de-escalation into the mix. "We're just doing neighborhood checks. We get a lot of complaints about—" "I'm handling this, Callahan," Jenkins snapped over his shoulder, blatantly disrespecting his senior partner in front of a civilian, a major violation of police decorum. Jenkins turned his attention back to Nicholas. "I need to see some identification. Driver's license right now." Nicholas didn't move. In his head, the watch commander was already writing the internal affairs report. Lack of reasonable suspicion, escalation without cause, unprofessional conduct. He wanted to see how far Jenkins would dig his own grave before hitting rock bottom. "Officer," Nicholas said, his tone shifting from polite to firmly instructive, "I am standing on private property. My private property. I am washing a car. Unless you are investigating a specific crime, or you have reasonable articulable suspicion that I have committed one you have no legal authority to demand my identification under the Fourth Amendment. So I will ask you again, am I suspected of a crime?" Jenkins' face flushed bright red. He wasn't used to civilians, especially black civilians, quoting constitutional law back to him with such chilling authority. His ego, fragile and easily bruised, took over completely. "You're acting highly suspicious, which gives me probable cause to identify you," Jenkins lied, stepping closer. "Now you're either going to hand me your ID, or I'm going to detain you for obstructing an investigation." "Brad, back off," Callahan warned, stepping forward. "He's on his own property. We have no victim, no 911 call. Let's get back in the car." "He is uncooperative and exhibiting evasive behavior," Jenkins barked, fully committing to the terrible path he had chosen. Nicholas looked Jenkins dead in the eye. "I am not evading anything. I am answering your questions. But I will not surrender my constitutional rights just because my presence in this neighborhood makes you uncomfortable, officer." Nicholas paused, looking at the rookie's nameplate. "Officer Jenkins." The casual, unafraid way Nicholas read his name was the final straw for Jenkins. The rookie interpreted Nicholas's calm, educated defiance as a threat to his authority. "Turn around and put your hands on the roof of the car," Jenkins ordered, unbuttoning the leather strap over his handcuffs. "You're being detained." "On what charge?" Nicholas asked, not moving an inch. "Failure to identify and resisting a lawful order, neither of which apply here," Nicholas replied smoothly. "A lawful order requires lawful authority. You are currently trespassing." Jenkins lunged. He reached out and grabbed Nicholas's left arm, trying to wrench it behind his back in a pain-compliance hold. For a fraction of a second, muscle memory almost took over. Nicholas had spent years taking down violent cartel members and armed gang enforcers. He could have broken Jenkins's grip, swept his leg, and had the rookie pinned face down on the concrete in under 2 seconds. But Nicholas Foster was a professional. He knew that the moment he physically resisted, Jenkins would draw his taser or his firearm. A black man fighting a white cop in a wealthy suburb only ended one way, regardless of who was in the right. So Nicholas went completely limp, offering zero physical resistance while keeping his eyes locked on Callahan. "I am not resisting," Nicholas said loudly and clearly ensuring Callahan's body camera and Jenkins captured the audio perfectly. "I am complying with your physical force under duress. I am noting that you have assaulted me on my own property without probable cause." Jenkins aggressively pushed Nicholas against the side of the pristine Chevelle. Nicholas winced slightly, not from pain, but hoping his belt buckle didn't scratch the clear coat he had just polished. Click. Click, click. The cold steel of the handcuffs snapped tight around Nicholas's wrists, locking his hands behind his back. "Brad, what the hell are you doing?" Callahan shouted, jogging up the driveway, his face pale. "Take those cuffs off him right now. Are you out of your mind? He was resisting." Jenkins panted, his adrenaline spiking as he patted down Nicholas's pockets. He refused to identify. "You can't arrest a man for standing in his driveway," Callahan yelled, looking around nervously. Across the street, the front door of a large beige house opened. Arthur Pendleton, a retired corporate lawyer and Nicholas's immediate neighbor, stepped out onto his porch. Arthur had met Nicholas a week ago, when Nicholas helped him move a heavy mahogany credenza into his dining room. Arthur was currently holding a smartphone, holding it horizontally, recording the entire interaction. Jenkins ignored the neighbor. He reached into Nicholas's back right pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. "Let's see who you really are," Jenkins sneered, flipping the wallet open. Nicholas stood silently against the car, his hands bound in cold steel. He felt the warm summer breeze against the back of his neck. He looked over his shoulder at Jenkins and gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Go ahead, Officer Jenkins," Nicholas said softly. "Look inside." Jenkins opened the wallet to pull out the driver's license, but as he flipped the leather fold open, his fingers didn't touch plastic. They touched cold, heavy metal. Pinned to the inside flap of the leather wallet, gleaming brilliantly in the afternoon sun, was a Westridge Police Department sergeant's badge. Right below it was a laminated police ID card. The photo on the ID matched the man in handcuffs perfectly. The rank printed in bold black letters read, "Sergeant Nicholas Foster, Watch Commander, 42nd Precinct." Jenkins stopped breathing. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost standing in the midsummer heat. The trap had just snapped shut. The silence that fell over the driveway was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. The only sounds were the gentle hum of the neighbor's central air conditioning and the rhythmic chirp of a cicada in the nearby oak tree. Officer Bradley Jenkins stared at the silver shield pinned inside the leather wallet. His brain flat out refused to process the information. It was as if he were trying to read a language he didn't speak. He blinked hard, hoping that when his eyes opened, the badge would vanish, replaced by a fake ID, a parole card, anything that would validate the terrible decision he had just made. But the badge remained, and beneath it the bold, unforgiving text of the police identification card stared back at him. Sergeant Nicholas Foster. Jenkins's hands began to tremble. The wallet slipped from his fingers, hitting the concrete driveway with a soft, pathetic slap. Officer Roland Callahan, who had been watching his partner's face morph from aggressive arrogance to sheer, unadulterated terror, stepped forward. He looked down at the dropped wallet. The silver badge caught the sunlight, flashing like a warning beacon. Callahan closed his eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath. "You idiot!" He whispered the words carrying the weight of 1,000 exhausted shifts. "You absolute arrogant idiot." "So, sir," Jenkins stammered, his voice cracking. He reached out with a trembling hand toward the handcuffs binding Nicholas's wrists. I had no idea. It was a misunderstanding. Let me just get these off you, Sergeant." "Step back," Nicholas commanded. His voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a terrifying steel-edged authority that froze Jenkins in his tracks. "Sergeant, please." Jenkins pleaded, his tough guy facade completely shattered, revealing the panicked 24-year-old underneath. "I didn't know who you were. You weren't in uniform. I was just doing my job." Nicholas slowly turned his head to look over his shoulder, his eyes locking on to the young officer. "That is exactly the problem, Officer Jenkins. You didn't know who I was. You thought I was just a civilian you could bully. You thought I was someone who didn't know his rights, someone you could intimidate into submission to pad your daily activity report. The fact that I am your commanding officer doesn't make this a mistake. It makes it a revelation of exactly how you police this community." Callahan stepped in, looking physically sick. "Sergeant Foster, I am so sorry. I tried to call him off." "I know you did, Officer Callahan," Nicholas said, his tone softening a fraction for the veteran cop. "Your body camera is rolling correct." "Yes, sir. It's been rolling since we pulled up." "Good. Leave it on," Nicholas instructed. "And Jenkins, do not touch those handcuffs. You put them on. They stay on until a supervisor arrives to document this scene." Jenkins looked like he was going to vomit. "Sergeant, please, if we call a supervisor, this goes to internal affairs. It's my career. Your career ended the moment you laid hands on a citizen without probable cause," Nicholas replied coldly. "Officer Callahan, get on the radio. Call the shift supervisor. Tell him you need him at this address immediately. Code 3. Callahan didn't hesitate. He unclipped his shoulder mic. "Unit 4. Adam to dispatch. Requesting a patrol supervisor to our 20. Expedite. We have an urgent situation." As the radio crackled with the dispatcher's acknowledgement, the sound of footsteps approaching on the asphalt drew their attention. Arthur Pendleton, the retired corporate lawyer from across the street, walked up to the edge of the driveway. He was still holding his smartphone up the red recording dot, blinking steadily. "Nicholas, everything all right over here?" Arthur asked, his voice dripping with the kind of upper-class indignation that usually made police departments very nervous. "I've got the entire interaction recorded, from the moment they blocked you in to the moment he assaulted you." Jenkins whipped his head around, his eyes wide with horror, as he realized a civilian had recorded the entire unconstitutional arrest. "Thank you, Arthur," Nicholas said calmly. "I'd appreciate it if you held on to that footage. Internal Affairs will be needing a copy." "Internal Affairs?" Arthur repeated, raising an eyebrow. "I'll be happy to provide it. And if you need a lawyer, Nicholas, I know the best civil rights litigators in the state." "I appreciate it, Arthur, but I don't think I'll need them," Nicholas replied. "I handle my own." For the next 8 minutes, nobody spoke. Nicholas stood patiently against his Chevelle, his hands locked behind his back. Jenkins paced near the cruiser, hyperventilating his hands, pulling at his own hair as the reality of his actions crushed down on him. He had arrested the new watch commander of the 42nd Precinct. Worse, he had done it illegally on camera in front of witnesses. The distant wail of sirens pierced the suburban quiet, growing louder and more urgent with each passing second. A white Ford Explorer with supervisor chevrons on the doors tore onto Elmwood Drive, its light bar painting the neighborhood in aggressive flashes of red and blue. The SUV screeched to a halt right behind Unit 4 Adam. The door flew open, and Captain Richard Knowles stepped out. Knowles was a massive man in his late 50s, a veteran commander who did not tolerate foolishness in his ranks. He had heard the tension in Callahan's voice over the radio, and expected to find a brawl, a barricaded suspect, or an officer injured. Instead, he found Officer Callahan standing at parade rest, looking miserable. He found Officer Jenkins leaning against the hood of the patrol car, crying silently. And he found a black man in handcuffs, leaning casually against a pristine, classic car. Captain Knowles marched up the driveway, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. Callahan, what the hell is going on here? Who is this? As Knowles got closer, the features of the handcuffed man came into focus. The captain stopped dead in his tracks. "Dave." Knowles said, his voice a mixture of shock and disbelief. "Nicholas Foster." "Good afternoon, Captain," Nicholas said calmly. "Sorry, I'm not in a position to shake your hand." Captain Knowles looked from Nicholas to the handcuffs to Jenkins and back to Nicholas. His face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. "Will someone tell me why the new sergeant of the 42nd Precinct is wearing department-issued steel in his own driveway?" "I can answer that, Captain," Nicholas said, his voice ringing with absolute clarity. "Officer Jenkins here observed me washing my vehicle, operating under the assumption that a black man in this neighborhood could not possibly own this property or this car. He initiated an unlawful detention. He trespassed on my property, demanded identification without reasonable suspicion of a crime, and when I politely informed him of my Fourth Amendment rights, he assaulted me, battered me against my vehicle, and placed me under false arrest." Knowles turned slowly to look at Jenkins. The look in the captain's eyes was lethal. "Is this true, Jenkins?" "Captain, I thought he was suspicious." Jenkins sobbed the tough cop act, completely abandoned. "I didn't know he was a cop." "That right there is the crux of the issue, Captain." Nicholas interjected smoothly. "He believes that if I were just a regular civilian, his actions would have been perfectly justified." Captain Knowles didn't need to hear another word. He had spent decades trying to build community trust, and rookies like Jenkins tore it down in a matter of seconds. "Callahan!" Knowles barked. "Take those cuffs off the sergeant. Now!" Callahan practically sprinted forward, pulling his handcuff key. Click! Click! The steel jaws opened. Nicholas brought his arms forward, rubbing his wrists, rolling his shoulders to get the blood flowing again. "Are you injured, Dave?" Knowles asked, his tone shifting to genuine concern. "Just my pride," Rick Nicholas said, using the captain's first name now that he was uncuffed. "And maybe the wax job on the Chevelle." Knowles turned his full, terrifying attention back to the rookie. "Officer Jenkins, step forward." Jenkins shuffled forward, looking like a man walking to the gallows. "You are a disgrace to that uniform." Knowles said, his voice vibrating with barely contained rage. "You bypassed protocol, you violated civil rights, and you ignored the direct warnings of your senior partner. You let your bias drive a police vehicle today." The captain held out his hand. "Shield and weapon. Now." Jenkins gasped, tears streaming down his face. "Captain, please." "I will not say it twice," Knowles roared. With shaking hands, Jenkins unpinned his badge. He unclipped his duty belt, the heavy leather thudding onto the concrete driveway. He handed his badge to the captain, effectively ending his law enforcement career before it had even truly begun. "You are suspended without pay, effective immediately pending a full internal affairs investigation and a referral to the district attorney for civil rights violations," Knowles stated coldly. "Callahan put him in the back of my cruiser. I'll drive him to the station to process the suspension." "Yes, sir," Callahan said. He gripped Jenkins by the arm gently but firmly and escorted the weeping ex-cop to the back of the supervisor's SUV. Knowles turned back to Nicholas, letting out a heavy, exhausted sigh. "Dave, I am so sorry. Welcome to the precinct." Nicholas offered a tight smile. "It's exactly why I took the promotion. Rick, we've got work to do. The badge is a sacred trust. When you use it as a weapon of bias, you don't just betray the public. You betray every good cop who wears it. Sergeant Nicholas Foster." 2 days later. Monday morning. The briefing room of the 42nd Precinct was packed. 30 officers sat in rows of desks, drinking coffee and chatting as they waited for roll call. There was a nervous energy in the room. Rumors had spread like wildfire over the weekend about Bradley Jenkins being stripped of his badge in a driveway, but nobody knew the exact details. The door to the front office opened. The room went dead silent. Nicholas Foster walked in. He was wearing a sharply pressed Class A uniform. The brass buttons gleamed. The silver sergeant's badge sat proudly on his chest. He looked like the embodiment of authority. He walked to the podium, looking out over the sea of faces. He saw Officer Callahan sitting in the second row, looking respectful and relieved. "Good morning," Nicholas said, his deep voice carrying easily to the back of the room. "My name is Sergeant Nicholas Foster. I am your new watch commander." He paused, letting his eyes meet the gaze of every officer in the room. "Some of you may have heard about an incident this weekend involving a former officer of this precinct," Nicholas continued. "Let me be entirely clear. We have a difficult job. It requires courage, it requires instinct, and it requires action. But above all, it requires integrity. If you let your prejudices dictate who you investigate, you are not a police officer. You are a liability, and I will not tolerate liabilities on my watch." He looked directly at Callahan, giving him a brief, respectful nod, acknowledging the veteran who had tried to do the right thing. "We police the community by being a part of it, not by treating it like an enemy camp." Nicholas finished opening his patrol binder. "Now, let's get to work. First shift hit the streets." As the officers filed out, whispering to each other with a newly found respect for their commander, Nicholas looked out the window. It was a beautiful sunny Monday. His Chevelle was safely parked in his garage, spotless and gleaming, and his precinct was exactly where it needed to be, under the watch of a man who knew the law, and more importantly, knew exactly what it meant to uphold it for everyone. A badge is a symbol of public trust, not a license to act on personal prejudice. Sergeant Foster's encounter proved that true authority comes from integrity, and the law, not intimidation. What did you think of the sergeant's calm handling of this intense situation? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story powerful, hit that like button, share it with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible real-life drama.